Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
They almost had it. AEW almost got it right this week. They came in with guns blazing, and by the end, they completely ran out of bullets. But the effort was there. And when it comes to AEW, all you can do is credit them where it's earned, because it's usually few and far between. So now that I've already pissed off all the AEW marks, you'll be happy to know what's on the books for today. Another Friday edition of the Five Starr Wrestling Report to cover AEW Dynamite and also continue along in our retro review series of NWA World Championship Wrestling and World Class Championship Wrestling. Of course, if you're new to the show, I'd very much appreciate it if you would help me out in the algorithms here on YouTube by subscribing, leaving a comment, and like the show for me. We are also on Rumble, if you prefer to watch the content over there. Either way, we're here each Monday and Friday to bring you wrestling recaps and discussions. Telling you like it is. I don't blow smoke up anyone's rears. I don't mask my opinion in any way. I just shoot it straight from the hip. And if you don't like it, too bad. Someone's got to give an honest wrestling report out there, and Lord knows it's ever going to come from your main wrestling media outlets. Especially when it comes to AEW. God almighty. You know, the term "in the tank" comes around a lot when it comes to how wrestling is talking about AEW's product these days, and it's not entirely inaccurate. There are plenty of sources out there that are very much in the tank for AEW. And while we are on the subject of it, why don't we just dive headfirst into this before the retro content and get it out of the way? I'm feeling extra saucy this week, so there might be a marginally more bit of sarcasm than usual when it comes to the Dynamite report this week. So buckle up, kids. Of course, diving right into the action from the onset. You ever think these people might actually benefit from starting the show with a recap package from the previous week? Christ, with the amount of hot-shotting they do on a week-to-week basis. And it'd be nice to be reminded of what we actually saw the previous week once in a blue moon. Yeah, they're giving me a lot of credit thinking I'm going to remember half that shit. But thank God almighty, they started the show with CM Punk. And even better, he wrestled Dax Harwood. Two actual pro wrestlers that know how to competently work and lay out a match. It's sad that I even have to mention something like that in the modern era, but lo and behold, here we are. And they did actual pro wrestling here. They did chain holds. They actually worked a methodical pace and did not needlessly go balls to the walls from the jump for no reason. I like that they actually built up to the superplex spot toward the end there, with Punk actually cutting off Dax the first go-around. And then once Punk got cut off for trying the Macho Man elbow drop, that is when Dax actually hit it on the second go-around. And it actually got a bigger pop than usual. Actually, one of my favorite parts of the whole match, and it's the subtle things in wrestling that always stand out to me because they're so few and far between anymore. I love the spot where Punk locked Dax in the Anaconda device for the first time, and in order for Dax to break it, he grabbed Punk by the hair and he yanked him down to the mat behind the ref's back. What a novel concept in wrestling. heels needing to cheat to get out of holds. Some nice reversals toward the end there. A couple nice near falls that were well timed and not overdone to death. And Punk ended up tapping out Dax with the Anaconda Vice in the second go-around. Nothing flashy, nothing overbooked, no garbage-ass run-ins. Just one guy beat another guy fucking clean. Doesn't need to be that hard. There were two things I didn't like about this match. The Ass Boys being ringside for no reason, and Bryce Remsburg. Specifically when it comes to anything involving Remsburg counting both guys out of the ring. Like, I know people get on Aubrey's case for doing ridiculously slow 10 counts. There's a spot in this match where Punk and Dax were laying outside the ring for, at the very least, 30 whole seconds. And somehow Remsburg was only up to like a count of 6 or 7 when Dax rolled back into the ring to break it. And trust me, I'll have plenty more to say about Bryce and his idiocy when it comes to officiating matches later on. But those are the only two things I didn't like about it. And notice how neither of my complaints came at the expense of Punk or Dax. And by the way, yes, I know that the Gun Club was out there to set up a tag match with FTR for next week, but again, this is where AEW's lack of ability to rationally explain anything comes into the fold. Why were the Guns out there to begin with? Why are they feuding with FTR now? More importantly, why are FTR teasing a face turn when they're still aligned with MJF? None of it makes sense, and none of it's explained at all. But apparently we're all either just supposed to know what's going on or speculate about it and try to come up with our own conclusions. There's also a nice reminder to showcase why FTR have been and always will be a much superior tag team to the Beta Bucks in every conceivable manner imaginable. You'd think for a split second that Punk was going to willingly try to work a TV match with Matt or Nick Jackson. Get the fuck out of here. Punk's not a goddamn moron. We had some Jericho Appreciation Society promo backstage that I skipped over, mostly because 2.0 just irritate the fuck out of me at this point with their squawking promos. I did kind of chuck at the visual, though, of Chris Jericho basically blocking Jake Hager in the frame entirely so that we barely ever saw him on camera. Just to remind everyone how worthless that guy still is. So we follow a great wrestling match with the status quo AEW TV match. An 8-man tornado, anything goes, basically everybody do whatever the fuck you want tag match. It's Sting, Darby Allin, and the Hardys versus Private Party, Butcher, and Blade. As if it takes a brain surgeon to figure out who's going over there. And 10 seconds into the match, I'm watching Sting do a crossbody dive off of the top rope to the outside mat, and the only thing I could think was, God damn it, Sting, fucking stop. Stop partaking in the outlaw garbage. This is like the 4th or 5th Sting match in a row now that I've watched where he's done that stupid crossbody dive off the top rope. And every single time, without fail, it always looks like it's on the verge of going horribly wrong. He either stumbles to gain his footing on the top when he comes down to land, or he almost overshoots it entirely and lands on his neck or hip. This guy's fucking 62, 63 years old now. I don't need to be watching Sting doing this stuff to himself. Not after all the health issues he's had and all the complications with his back and neck after that career scare he had with Seth Rollins in WWE. I don't need to see it. Nor do I advise Sting signing off on this. And if he's signing off on it himself, then shame on him. He should be a smarter worker than that. This whole match was fucking retarded. You signed Jeff Hardy to a contract not less than 2 weeks ago, and you're already involving him in the crash dummy garbage on TV? Look. Tony Khan, I'm particularly calling you out for this one because at the end of the day, the buck stops with you when it comes to making decisions. I'm trying to be semi-constructive with this too. The Hardy Boys are in the twilight of their careers right now, and this is probably going to be their last hoorah as a team before they end up winding their careers down. You have several probable good tag feuds and programs that you could conceivably have these guys do in the next year or so if they're still healthy to do it. FTR, Red Dragon. I could even get behind them wrestling the Beta Bucks if it's booked logically, which it won't be if the Bucks are overseeing it. But wasting the Hardys in a long-term program with Andrade's group of mediocre geeks, and not just that, but above all else, wasting them in a reckless hardcore match for no reason. All this is doing is risking injury and taking time off of their careers that much quicker. And I know the only reason they did this match was so everyone could see Jeff Hardy do the swanton off the ladder in the vestibule of the building, but Jesus fucking Christ, I've never booked a wrestling show in my life, and I could have told you that was a stupid idea before you even put the pen to paper. You want to make a Jeff Hardy ladder spot mean something? Put it on a fucking pay-per-view where it'll actually matter. Build anticipation for it. Make people pay money to see the big spot. Don't blow it off on a TV match with a week's build and a garbage match that no one's going to remember a month from now. And especially don't blow it off on TV if it's not going to be the fucking finish. Like, I mean, I don't even know why I have to bring this up, other than the fact that the idiots in charge of putting the show together have no idea what they're doing. Jeff Hardy hits a swanton bomb on Butcher and Blade from like 20 plus feet in the air through two tables with Sting and Darby standing right there. So why are these morons walking away from the rubble to go back to the ring instead of, oh, I don't know, let me piece this together in my head here, something logical, like getting the fucking pinfall? Again, for the record, never booked a wrestling card in my life. Never spent a day in the business. Am I the only one that thinks of this shit when it happens in real time? Give or take Jim Cornette and Brian Last. The only sounding wrestling historians with two brain cells to rub together that still watch this hot steaming garbage. Yeah, apparently Jeff Hardy hitting a swanton from like 20 feet in the air, that's not good enough to lead to the finish. Apparently a better finish idea is having Sting and Matt hit concurrent twists of fates on Private Party in the middle of the ring and beating them with wrestling moves. So that whole segment can go piss up a rope. All right, I have a question. Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley are a tag team now, correct? So why are they still coming out with separate entrances? I know no one else thinks of this stuff, but really, even if I don't particularly care for the pairing, at least could you go out of your way to treat them like an actual team? I don't even care if they do the lame WWE version of it where they just mash guys' themes together. At least have them walk out as a unit. Give me some reason to think they're an actual team and not just every AEW cut and paste makeshift pairing they do. Anyway, they wrestled the Varsity Blondes, and the only thing I could think the whole time the match was going on was, remember when they were actually starting to give Brian Pillman Jr. a little bit of a rub, and he was starting to get over? Remember he wrestled MJF and kind of looked like they were starting to push him as a singles guy? Well, he got killed in this match. So much for that push. I still like watching him and Griff team together. They're not a bad duo, and I wish Tony would actually try to utilize them as a more significant undercard team instead of burying them every time we see them wrestle on TV. Oh yeah, and speaking of things that were never followed up on, remember when Julia Hart got misted in the face from Malachi? Yeah, maybe it would have been nice to see some storyline follow up with that, instead of her just moping on the steps with her head turned away from the ring. So anyway, Mox and Danielson won. Then Mox did a weird promo about something involving respect for William Regal, and I think he mentioned blood and broken cartilage somewhere in there. I don't know. I'm starting to sour on Mox's promos now. Like, at one point, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt because I actually kind of believed in a lot of the stuff he was saying on the stick. But between the fact that his ring work is utter trash and a lot of his material just starts to sound the same after a while, I don't know, I'm kind of over it. Up next, we had this MJF promo. So by virtue of that alone, I started paying a little more attention to the show following that Punk Dax opener. And again, it's one of those MJF promos where he covers a lot of ground, so it's kind of hard to break things down in detail, but the short version is he's not through with CM Punk, and when the time's right, they're going to have that third rubber match, and MJF is going to make sure it's the most embarrassing moment of Punk's career. So that's good. I'm glad that they're not entirely wrapped up with that feud yet. And then he goes into scolding Wardlow, mocking the fact that he couldn't get the job done last week with winning the TNT title, and talking about the fact that he still works for Max now, and that contract between them is ironclad. So now that Wardlow tried to screw MJF, he's going to make Wardlow's life a living nightmare going forward. And that was kind of the expected direction I figured they would go with all this. I think the only nitpick I would have when I think back about how they laid everything out with this Wardlow thing, him turning on MJF and all that, I mean, he had to assume that MJF wasn't going to just let Wardlow out of his contract, right? Looking back in retrospect, doesn't this all kind of make Wardlow look stupid for fucking over MJF? Thinking that Max was just going to drop the contract between them and let Wardlow be a free agent? I don't know, again, it's the years and years of watching this sport where a lot of these questions start to circulate when I start to see a little bit of the plot holes open up. It's why I kind of thought they missed a golden opportunity last week by having Wardlow actually just squash Scorpio and win the belt. Why not? At least this way, Wardlow had something to latch onto, so if MJF tried to screw over Wardlow by forcing him to hand over the TNT title to him, they'd at least have an even Steven mechanism to advance the story. Wardlow's contract versus the TNT title. MJF wants the title, and that's fine, but if Wardlow's going to defend the belt against him, then he wants the added stip that if Wardlow retains, he's free from MJF's contract and he can go his own way without being shackled. So either way, one party wins. Again, a minute detail, but kind of like my idea better than what they ended up doing. But like I said, this is a really good promo segment. And yeah, I like the finish here with Wardlow trying to come out to get into a confrontation with MJF, but the huge army of security all hold him back while MJF basically tells Wardlow that he's going to pay him to sit at home and piss in the wind for the time being, and there's nothing he can do about it. So, give us a little bit of time to see how Wardlow plots his revenge and makes his big return to television. Only thing I would have changed here, and again, something fairly subtle, but I think it would have added a little more gravity to the segment. Instead of having Wardlow walk out under his own power at the end, I'd have had security cuff him and escort him out of the building. Just to try and give it more of a wild beast scenario where Wardlow basically had to be dragged out of the arena, and whenever Wardlow actually does get his hands on MJF, he means business. But overall, I'm still very, very intrigued with where this is all going. I still think they should go the direction of having MJF win the AEW World title by mid-year at the absolute earliest. And, if that's the moment where Wardlow makes the big triumphant return and they go all in with the Wardlow MJF title match, I'd be all for it. It's good stuff. I also dug Wheeler Yuta's promo in the back with Trent Beretta, basically telling him he's not there to be a best friend, he's there to be the best wrestler. And while yes, I also had to absorb the visual of Chucklefuck Taylor and the company mascot standing there like Nimrods the whole time, if this is leading to the split of the best friends, maybe there's a God after all. And he really is answering my prayers all these years after having to suffer through watching these clowns on my television every single week. In the match that should have been the main event, Adam Cole versus Jay Lethal, taking this one straight out of the Ring of Honor playbook. By the way, I wanted to ask this. Did Justin Roberts actually try to imitate the Macho Man during Lethal's ring intro? Or did he just burp under his breath when trying to say Elizabeth, New Jersey? Either way, he's still the worst ring announcer of all time. I'll say this though, man. If this is a prototype of Tony Khan's vision of what he would like to do with Ring of Honor going forward, doing these kinds of matches with guys that can actually work and wrestle and not all the indie outlaw beta bucks level bullshit we see on a week-by-week basis, I'll take it. I'd much rather watch more shit like Punk versus Dax and Lethal versus Cole. Actual real fucking pro wrestling. Working body parts. Selling. Trying to actually build emotion and drama as the match goes along. Now, was it a perfect match from beginning to end? No. There were some small things that went on during the match that I wasn't too fond of. Like Red Dragon being out there as early on as they were just kind of left me rolling my eyes. If they'd have done the ref distraction at the very end and we didn't see them prior to the run-in, I actually kind of would have been fine with them doing the heat finish that way. But again, man, it's more of the referee incompetency stuff that I always talk about. The ref sees the guys outside the ring either running blatant interference or trying to get involved in some way, and instead of just kicking them away from ringside and threatening them with fines, like the refs used to do in wrestling when they actually had some form of power or control, no, instead they just let them all hang out ringside willy-nilly. Like it's playtime at Chuck E. Cheese where it's a free-for-all with no rules or regulations. But again, the work both guys did here was very good. Again, working body parts, slowing things down for a change, letting things breathe, not going so overboard with the false finishes that it just leaves you desensitized by the end. I would have preferred to just see Cole pin Lethal with the Panama Sunrise so we didn't have to see the Cole over-exaggerated WWE facial expression he does in every fucking match. But like I said, the finish was done well with Lethal setting up Cole for the lethal injection, but Fish and O'Reilly hit the apron, so Paul Turner's turned away momentarily. And Lethal tries to spring back to hit the cutter on Cole, but Cole gives him a nasty nut shot in the air and hits Lethal with the boom. Not overly complex. Yes, still slightly overbooked, but in terms of the usual stupid heat finishes we see on this show every week, at least this one actually looked believable. I still have no intrigue in seeing them do the rematch between Hangman Page and Adam Cole, but you gotta buffer Page with something before Double or Nothing, right? Most of his title reigns felt like a buffer, but it is what it is. I also still wish they would actually do something with Jay Lethal instead of just putting him out there to work a TV match every other month and a half. Again, much like the Hardys, he's another guy that can still go despite not being the youngest guy in the business these days. He's another guy that knows how to work. Probably someone that the younger dudes would actually benefit from doing programs with. Lethal can actually teach him how to properly construct and lay out a match. But what do I know? We had Sammy Guevara and Ty Conti out for a promo with Tony. And of course, 15 seconds in, Tony just passively hands off the mic to Sammy so he can just stand in the corner like an idiot. Just like he always does. So Sammy ends up basically letting everyone know that he's heard people say that he cannot recklessly destroy his body forever because someday it's going to actually catch up to him, which is true, by the way, but that he's going to do it anyway because the people deserve it. So in other words, he'll be retired before he's 35. And the long story short here is that they want a tag match with Paige Van Zant and someone in Top Team. So of course out comes Lambert, Ethan Page, and Scorpio Sky. who is still the TNT champion, and for the life of me, I still couldn't tell you why. Anyway, so Lambert basically tells Sammy and Ty to piss off. The heels leave. Lambert ends up planting a kiss on one of the TNT belts. Whether it's the fake one or the real one, I have no idea. But Sammy infers that he and Ty had sex with one of the TNT belts that Lambert's holding in his hand. So, of course, he drops it on the floor, and apparently this was supposed to be a mic drop for the babyfaces. Meanwhile, all I saw on camera was one of their titles being worthlessly dropped on the floor like a sack of shit. And if this was done in the 1970s or 80s, they'd have been burnt to the stake for this. The other thing I wondered was, how does one fornicate while having a large piece of leather strapped around their waist? Or better yet, here's a better question. Why are Sammy and Ty having intercourse with an alleged prestigious championship belt? God almighty. If only Bill Watts was around to see this stuff live. I can only imagine what he would do to guys like Tony Khan if he heard that this was signed off to actually happen on a professional wrestling show. Death by strangulation would probably rank high up there. So we had Layla Hirsch versus Red Velvet, with Chris Statlander being banned from ringside. As if that makes any fucking difference, especially in this company. And whether or not Statlander's banned from ringside, it's still Layla versus Velvet in a singles match. It wasn't good last week when I saw it, and it wasn't good here either. Another classic installment of Bryce Remsburg, AEW's most inept official, just letting the girls brawl outside the ring before the opening bell for like 5 straight minutes, completely incapable of controlling either of these two women, one of whom is about the size of a garden gnome, and the other who weighs about as much as my 64-year-old mother. So I'll fast forward to the garbage finish. Layla goes under the ring to grab an unhooked ring post, which we've seen in like 3 straight Layla Hirsch matches from now. One might think management would look under the ring before the show to make sure Layla doesn't try to conceal one of the buckles under there. But nope, apparently they're all idiots. So she goes to use the buckle on Velvet. Remsburg thwarts her, and with his back turned, Layla reaches into her trunks to pull out, yes, you guessed it, another fucking ring post. By the way, don't ask me how Layla was capable of wrestling with a steel ring post lodged in her trunks during a wrestling match. We'll just pretend it makes sense, and we'll move on because I have nothing constructive to say about it. Nyla Rose beat up Thunder Rosa. Vicky Guerrero screamed for a while. I walked away. And the main event was the Job Order Dorks, Alex Reynolds and Johnny Hungy versus Daniel Garcia and Chris Jericho. Yes, that was the main event for the show. Not Punk versus Dax or Adam Cole versus Jay Lethal, but 2 indie job guys against an undercard guy and the veteran whose ego is more overinflated than his gut. And this is post-workout Chris Jericho, with him dropping all the excess body fat in the last couple months. And I tried to give this match a chance because there was only about 15 minutes or so left in the program anyway. And as soon as Aubrey let Reynolds and Silver do double team moves for like 2 straight minutes without counting either guy out, I gave up and immediately fast forwarded to the finish. Jericho hit Reynolds in the spine with a baseball bat, and Garcia tapped him out with the Scorpion Deathlock. This sucked. This faction sucks. The Dark Order sucks. And this was one of the worst finishes to an AEW show I've seen so far after what was actually shaping up to be a moderately decent Dynamite for a change. God almighty. Let me tell you, man, there have been some pretty rank episodes of Dynamite, but I don't think I've seen an episode that nosedived into the death pit as this one did in the last half hour of the show. This is actually turning out to be a pretty good show for a change, but fuck, dude. Starting with that women's match and capping off with that main event, It was like watching 2019, 2020 AEW all over again. It was right back to the garbage outlaw material, and boy, did it go out with a hell of a whimper. If Tony structured this show from top to bottom, he gets an F- for card structure this week. I loved the Punk Dax match. I enjoyed the Lethal Cole match for what it was. The MJF Wardlow stuff was good. But like I said, man, last 30 or so minutes of the show was some of the worst AEW television I've seen all year. Like I said, I even skipped most of the main event after watching Reynolds and Silver just do double team spots for like 3 solid minutes while Aubrey just stood there like a dope watching it all happen. I mean, what can you say, man? If they did more shit like they did in the opener or what they had with that MJF Wardlow segment, AEW would be the best wrestling show on the market today. Instead, it's sprinkles of good stuff surrounded by a cesspool of bad wrestling, bad show structure, and indie goofballs doing whatever they want with no ramifications. You let the inmates run the asylum, this is what you get. All right, let's get to the good stuff. NWA World Championship Wrestling from March 22nd, 1986. And we begin the show with footage of a Black Bart Sam Houston match. At first being very confused as to why I was watching this on my screen. Then we find out a minute later from Tony and David that Black Bart is the new Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion. Cool. Not sure what I'm supposed to take away from that, considering it's Black Bart. And as we cut to the rundown of the show, we get the Rock and Roll Express out for a very quick promo. Pretty cut and dry delivery from every rock and roll promo you've ever heard a million times already. Morton says some stuff to get the people fired up, and Gibson mutters words under his breath, and if you can pick up more than 2 words, you win a gold star for the night. I did appreciate Morton's burn line, where he insinuates that the reason Ric Flair is always surrounded by women is that so they can keep him company while he falls asleep. Yeah, Flair was none too happy about that line when he came out later on. Our first match was Jimmy Valiant taking on Kent Glover. The only thing of note being Valiant's pre-match promo, where he incoherently babbled about his dog being bigger than David's dog. And I don't know what that means, nor do I want to know what that means. It was also made creepier by Jimmy having his hand on David's shoulder when he said it. David was also smiling back at him. Very unsettling. Beyond that, it was every Jimmy Valiant match in the book. Not a single clean wrestling move from start to finish, but that is why we love Jimmy. The only super babyface in wrestling history that can purely get over with eye gouges, back rakes, and wacky shucking and jiving. I also believe Jimmy's attempts to call out Paul Jones's army in this match. He referred to them as Baron von Raschko and Killer Khan. Epic. Ron Garvin was out next for a promo, doing every deer in the headlight promo you've ever heard Ronnie do. I still can't believe after all these weeks of him bumbling and fumbling his way through promos, they're still putting this guy out there every week to talk. Really was sink or swim back in the day in pro wrestling. Ain't nothing scripted with Ronnie coming out to do promos every week. Of course, I guess with them deciding that he was going to be the guy that they were going to have win the world title a year down the road, they were going to do their damnedest to get this guy over by any means necessary. Even if it meant having to listen to 186 brutal promos week after week. Main point is that he wanted Ric Flair in a cage to settle the score. After this was where they showed the highlights of the Bart Houston Mid-Atlantic title match. And I did not write much down about it, but it should be noted that even a Black Bart Sam Houston match back in the day still had 10 times the heat of anything in modern wrestling today. We had Jim Cornette out for a promo, basically there to do a heat promo on the Road Warriors, referring to them as guys with million-dollar bodies and 10-cent brains. Also took some shots at the Rock and Roll Express and the, quote, teeny boppers that all support them. This also wouldn't be the only time that the word teeny bopper was mentioned on the show. God, you think of how much times have changed. Like the fact that teeny bopper was actually once used as a derogatory slander toward women. Meanwhile, in 2022, I don't even know if that word exists in the English dictionary anymore. Actually, the best part of the promo here was right at the end when Corny had mentioned that after the Midnight Express win the Crockett Cup, they're going to rename it the Cornette Cup, and each year they're going to host it at Mama Cornette's living room. Man, could you have imagined the vignettes? The Midnight Express versus Phil Brown and Ray Traylor. God, the clean-shaven Bubba Rogers in a singlet. And if that wasn't baffling in and of itself, hearing Jim Cornette refer to him in this segment as a big fat goof, you had to think that guy, Bubba Rogers, he ended up becoming a bodyguard for Jim Cornette. Match was the usual midnight extended squash that we've all come to know and love by now. Other than Corny's fat shaming of Traylor here, it wasn't too noteworthy. It did feature my favorite Midnight spot where they go to dump the guy out of the ring, and one of the Midnights goes to pretend to catch him, but then they move out of the way so the guy crashes and burns on the concrete. And if they tried this spot in 2022, guaranteed someone would die, but in 1986, totally worked. This was the point where David and Tony ran down the rest of the seeds for the Crockett Cup tournament outside the top 10. And I did not write all 14 teams down here, but I took note of a couple of them. Buzz Sawyer and Rick Steiner being one of the aforementioned teams. The fabulous ones, Steve Kern and Stan Lane of the Florida Territory. The Fantastics, who I obviously got to watch a lot of in Mid-South Wrestling, but, you know, looking back in time, I don't really think I ever came to appreciate just how great those guys were until I saw some of their work in Smoky Mountain. Great team. As well as the team of Bill Dundee and Buddy Landell. Yeah, Buddy Landell is coming back to NWA TV. Leo Burke wrestled Don Graves. That he did. Burke won with the pile driver. Good thing gorgeous Jimmy Garvin was out next to cut an awesome heel promo, informing us that he is out of breath because he just spent the last 3 minutes chasing Wahoo Mcdaniel out the back door of the building to send him packing like a scalded dog. And aside from calling him a sneaky Indian, he concludes by saying that he is simply out to issue an apology because had he known that Wahoo was going to show up, he would not have signed a match for later on against a different opponent. Okay, now I'm actually genuinely curious. How in the fuck were Ronnie and Jimmy Garvin related? Better yet, how the fuck was Ronnie the one that they thought was better suited to be a world champion over Jimmy? Now, that's $1 million question I actually want to know an answer to. Coming back from the break, Tony solemnly informed us that due to the banning of the pile driver in sanctioned NWA matches, management had no other choice but to disqualify Burke and award Don Graves the winner of the previous match. And I don't know why I found this funny, but as soon as Tony said, "Congratulations to Don Graves on the win," I started laughing. As if this was some signature-defining win for Don fucking Graves on this show, beating Leo Burke, of all people. So we had Jimmy Garvin versus Bill Mulkey, which also had some great entertainment value to it. Most of which came from David marking out on commentary over the thought of Wahoo getting his hands on Jimmy Garvin. Again, the man I deemed the greatest commentator in all of wrestling history that was never recognized for how great he truly was. Of course, Jimmy went with the Brainbuster deal, or as we learned in World Class 3 years prior, the bombs away. Then we had a Dusty Rhodes promo, and this was classic Dusty at work here, delivering what I would like to coin the spit take promo. Basically, Dusty came out with about 14 or 15 ideas on his mind all at one time, and without actually finishing his thought on any of them, he just casually transitioned from talking point to talking point, still managing to wrap up the whole thing in about 2 minutes. He first talked about coming back from a road trip from Michigan, then he talked about losing some titles, then he randomly got on the subject of letting us know that Baby Doll was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to help set up the shark cage that him and Arn were apparently going to be locked in later on. And I have many questions about that, by the way. For example, why was Baby Doll setting up a steel cage by herself in Philadelphia, of all places? Then he talked about Wahoo McDaniel and Jimmy Garvin. Then he talked about Ric Flair and partying. Then he mentioned something about Tully Blanchard and J.J. Dillon. And in the best part of the promo, he circles back to talking about how Ric Flair will soon be going to bed looking for his world title to wear while he sleeps. And when he's looking around unable to find his said title, he can give Dusty a call in the morning so that he can tell Flair that he's taking good care of it. And after he lets the fans know that he loves them, he concludes with the following statement: Magnum TA might be the most handsome person in the world besides myself. And albeit I have no idea what the fuck Dusty was talking about for the majority of this promo, it was still 1,000 times better than any scripted or riffed promo you hear about 99% of the time in the business today. Remember how great wrestling used to be? So we get Wahoo McDaniel in his TV debut against Bob Owens, which was, not good. Again, it is important to remember that the timestamp around this point, Wahoo was showing up in the NWA in his late 40s. So to say he was a spring chicken by this point in his career would probably be giving him too much credit. Still had some wicked chops, though. But God bless him, that's probably all he had in his offensive arsenal by 1986. Certainly wasn't cardio. Following the break, we had announcer Craig Sager of TBS Sports and Dale Brown, basketball coach with LSU, and they were at the booth to provide what I would like to dedicate the extremely Caucasian segment of the show, where we had just about every lukewarm cringe joke in the book. And I did not bother writing a whole lot down about it. Here's all you need to know. Lots of awkward attempts at comedy, none of it was funny. I'm also not a sports guy, so I had no idea who these men were, or better yet, why they were being prominently featured on a pro wrestling show. It was duly noted that even in the year 1986, Tony Schiavone never held back from passing the mic off to guys during interview time. See it every week on Dynamite, and I still complain about it every time, but here he is on national TV in 1986 allowing Craig Sager and Dale Brown to try and conduct a promo segment on live television. And it went over like a fart in church, let me tell you. Luckily, we had Paul Jones and his crew out to somewhat save the segment. Most of it being saved by Paul delivering one of his all-time great seething heat promos where his face turns beet red, and as they zoom the camera further and further in on him, you can actually see the blood vessels popping in his eyes. Talk about pure passion. And I did note, too, that despite the fact that I was never a Tijo Khan guy by any stretch, the visual of them putting the camera on him with the 1,000-yard stare, it's never not funny. And this one was particularly great because right before they actually put the camera on Tijo, he was kind of drifting off, looking to the side like a normal person. But as soon as he caught glimpse that the red light was on him, he had to flip that switch and go, oh fuck, I'm on camera. And he was wide-eyed and twitching like a caged animal. It was all kinds of perfectly terrible. Speaking of such, in the most perfect, abysmally horrible match of all time, Baron Von Rashki and Tijo Khan teamed up to take on the Italian Stallion and Tony Zayn. Get this spot. Tijo is in there scuffling with Tony Zayn, and I cannot say wrestling, because that would imply that they were doing something involving coherent pro wrestling. Whatever Zayn and Khan were doing early on in this match, it was not wrestling. The spot is Tony hit the rope, and he ducks the first clothesline from Tijo, but as he comes off the second time around, the spot was supposed to be Tijo catching Zayn with a knee to the gut so he could take the bump. The problem was that Zayn came off the ropes too fast for Tijo to get his leg up in time. Yes, Tony fucking Zayn was too fast for Tijo coming off the ropes. The job guy in the NWA that made Joey Janela look like Lex Luger. The big tub of goo with no physique and back acne, Tony Zayn. That guy was too quick for Tijo to get his knee up in time. So Tijo got his leg like maybe 2 inches off the ground, if that. Zayn kind of, sort of bumped into Tijo's leg and still managed to take a semi-halfway decent flip bump to make it look like they totally didn't fuck up the spot. I also appreciated the spot where Paul Jones spent about like 8 months beating the shit out of Zayn on the outside while the match was still going, and Pee Wee Anderson either completely ignored it or was distracted during that 8-month time frame, just letting it happen. Must have been a hell of a distraction. And the finish to this horrible match was Tijo barely being able to hit Zayn with a power slam off the ropes, and Baron put Zayn in the claw for the ref stoppage. This was 5-star epically bad. Epically bad enough where I got a good amount of entertainment out of watching it. And I highly look forward to a future single showdown between Tony Zayn and Tijo Khan on this show. If that isn't booked for next week, I will be incredibly sad. It was followed with Ric Flair out for a promo, who should begin with what else other than mentioning hanging out and fucking girls on spring break in Florida, as they wake up wondering whether or not there's life after Ric Flair. Which was made even better by Tony giving the side eye at the camera with absolute perfect timing. He then spent a minute or so running down Ronnie Garvin and explaining every reason he's better than Ronnie at wrestling, which was entirely undisputable. And he also promised to retain his world title at the Crockett Cup, and if Dusty does not win the belt this time, it's his last shot. Can't confirm whether or not that was word of mouth or if they actually added that as a special stipulation to the match, but guess we'll see. Oh yeah, and this was also another case where the word teeny bopper was mentioned when Flair dropped the line about Ricky Morton. Yes, it was teeny bopper girls in their training undergarments. Those were apparently Rock and Roll Express fans back in the day. And the unintentional awkward comedy continued on the show, this time with another celebrity promo in the form of Joe Nighthawk Coltrane, who I actually do have vague recollections of around this time, as I know he ended up getting involved with some of the Paul Jones Army stuff later on. But in this segment, this was another case of ride or die, because they sent Coltrane out there to just say words. And say words he did. He said some words, and they were so uncomfortably spoken that Jim Cornette had to come out to save the segment. And this was one of the best moments of live television I think I've ever seen. Corny comes out. He essentially tells Coltrane that it's his interview time, tells him to go pound sand, basically. And the humble Nighthawk apologizes for taking up everyone's time. He voluntarily walks off camera. And then with Tony and Cornette standing there, Corny just goes, no, he took off. All right, then. Nice to see you, Tony. And he shakes Tony's hand. The Rock and Roll Express music plays. Cornette walks away. And Tony casually goes, all right, then, let's go to the ring. Fucking epic bit of television right there. I don't know how much of that was planned out, how much of it was ad-libbed, but Corny's delivery could not have been more perfectly executed. The handshake to Tony was what got me. You got to think about it in context for a second. You think about the fact that Corny's entire gimmick is that he's a loudmouth, sputtering wild man that could rant and rave for hours on end about God knows what. Meanwhile, he was so caught off guard here that Nighthawk just willingly left. He didn't even come up with anything to think about here in terms of promo material. Just walked out, told him to go fuck off. Nighthawk fucked off, and well, that was about it. Man. Having some good laughs watching the show this week. Can't tell if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but what the hell. So that led to the Rock and Roll Express versus Paul Garner and Larry Clark, which was highly less entertaining than anything from the previous segment. I still love David Crockett getting an orgasm over the double dropkick finish. Every single time, without fail, when Ricky and Robert set up for that double dropkick, it's splurge city for David at the booth. I wonder if Tony actually has to back up a few feet to prep himself for it. Maybe probably wouldn't want to mess up his suit. We had Ric Flair back out for another promo, who was literally just there to plug his upcoming tours around the country and put over how great Tully and Arn are. Tully and Arn versus Mike Samani and Ron Rossi. God, just watching Tully and Arn work together as a team, it's a spectacle in and of itself. Everything they do makes sense. They're always in the right place at the right time. Nothing looks contrived. They're actually tagging in and out. There's a novel concept in wrestling anymore. Maybe Reynolds and Silver should go watch some old NWA tapes. Maybe learn how actual fucking tag wrestling works. Great finish with the elevated Gorebuster combo off the second rope. Oh, and hey, imagine that. It was a devastating looking offensive move, so it was actually the finish. Not a goddamn commercial break spot. The only other thing I wrote down here was the epic verbal showdown with Flair and David arguing over Ronnie Garvin being a threat to Ric Flair in the cage. It's one thing David has a great ability to do on this show. Being able to have extremely stern conversations with the heels, but actually have the balls to stand up to them and call them out when they try to prop themselves up. And David Crockett right there to put them in their place and get the babyfaces over. Just like how wrestling used to be done. Wahoo Mcdaniel came out for a promo, making sure to zoom the camera all the way out so they could actually capture Wahoo in the frame with that giant feather bonnet he had on. Or is it pronounced bonnet? Bonnet, whatever. Basically, here's the extent of what I wrote down. He started calling out Jimmy Garvin and telling him to name the place and time where they can have their fight. And as he's talking, Magnum TA is making his way to the ring off camera, to which everyone begins leaping to their feet with excitement. Because Magnum was a super babyface. So whatever Wahoo said after the point Magnum came out was completely drowned out. I'm sure it was not that important. And we get Magnum TA versus Dave Dellinger. Simply put, couple punches, couple chops, belly to belly, 1, 2, 3. There's something oddly comical about David Crockett marking out for moves on this show. Especially here, like, Tony's in the middle of a conversation, like, trying to plug the afternoon session for the opening round matches of the Crockett Cup. David interrupts him mid-sentence so that he can casually scream out, "Belly to belly, I knew it!" As if Magnum had any other fucking move that he hits in his matches 99% of the time. I laughed so hard listening to David this week. He was so on fire. I'm telling you, if you have the Peacock subscription, just skip to the Magnum versus Dave match. Listen to the announcers call this thing. It's the most epic 2 minutes of television you could possibly hope for. And by 2 minutes, I mean like 60 seconds at most. That was followed with Magnum and Wahoo doing a brief promo to put over that Wahoo's going to be joining up with Dusty and Magnum to go after the Horsemen. We also had another Magnum promo on Nikita Koloff, where he said that if Nikita wants the Russian chain match, Magnum will take it if it means finally getting that long-awaited U.S. heavyweight title match that we've been waiting millennia to happen now. Actually, it might be longer. I think we've been waiting for Nikita versus Magnum for the U.S. title long before God created heaven and earth. That's how long we've been waiting for that match. And speaking of the Devils, Nikita and Ivan Koloff were out next for a promo. Ivan letting us know that beyond Magnum signing the contract for the Russian chain match to face Nikita, he apparently must go through a series of tests as well. Nikita vowed to choke out Magnum with his chain, and holy shit, I actually understood every single bit of dialect from Nikita in this monologue. That might be an FSWR first, being able to decipher Nikita's bad broken English. Then Ivan wrestled Rocky Kernodle, and aside from the one studio fan that really hated the idea of Ivan using a blatant chokehold midway through the match, nothing else to note about it. Jimmy Garvin and Precious were back out at the booth, this time sporting entirely different gear. Guess Jimmy was feeling blue. Double D, double die. Or this was taped the previous week, and they didn't think about that when they edited the taping schedule. I thoroughly enjoyed Garvin here, not only making fun of the fact that nobody in the NWA is good enough to beat him, but that he somehow tied this back around to making fun of Wahoo's bogus feathers he wears on his head. Of all things that could possibly offend Jimmy Garvin for not wanting to wrestle Wahoo, discounting him being fat and dirty, apparently it's the feathers that gravely upset him. Had another brief corny promo to put over his boys. Also to congratulate the Road Warriors for graduating 6th grade for the 8th time last week. And just when I thought this was going to be another cut and dry heat promo, who should come out but Nighthawk? Here to retort back at Corny for cutting him off earlier in the program. And, well, he tried to do a passionate babyface promo. It was certainly more believable than his initial promo earlier on. And this was, of course, done so the Midnights could come out and save Corny while Ricky and Robert ran in to even the odds and send the heels packing. Nothing too extreme, but man, did the people pop for that Midnight Rock and Roll face-off. Again, man, that kind of nuclear heat that you just can't spawn in 2022 no matter how hard you try. Especially over a period of time. Like that chemistry that the Midnight and the Rock and Roll Express had in the tag division back in the day, it's unlike anything you'd ever seen in the business before when it came to fan reaction. It really was on par with Freebirds Von Erich level of heat. And the main event was Ron Garvin killing Brody Chase, pulling out all the limb stretching and body manipulation in the book. Guess we know where Pete Dunne's inspiration came from in WWE all those years later. He was watching Ronnie Garvin stretch dudes on television back in the day and said, I want to do that kind of shit to people. And he adopted the personality and everything. Oops, did I say that out loud? Yeah, that's all good. I like Pete Dunne, or whatever he's going by on the main roster now. What do they call him now? Butch? Something like that. Of course, Ronnie won with a knockout blow. And with about a minute left in the show, we had Tully, Arn, and JJ out for a closing promo. One of those promo segments where you can tell that they're extremely pressed for time, so it's like rapid fire speed from one guy to the other to get their shit in. JJ mentioned something about having guys polish up Tully and Arn's belts because no one's worthy of beating them. Tully said that says that even though him and Arn are seated fourth in the Crockett Cup, as long as they walk out the winners at the end of the night, all will be good. And Arn tried to say something, but Tony quickly cut him off because they ran out of time, and Arn just lowered his head in disappointment, which I cackled at. This is a fun show. Like I said, maybe I was just in a good mood or something, but the levels of comedy on this show were just through the roof this week. Intentional or unintentional. But, like most of the matches were meh. But like the promo stuff, that was fire. I had no idea what the fuck all the celebrity stuff accomplished in the end, but who knows? Maybe they needed to kill some time. Crazy thing, too, is like we're still 3 or 4 weeks out from the 86 Crockett Cup. And I mean, they've hyped this thing as a big deal in the last couple episodes. I didn't realize the 86 Crockett Cup didn't happen until like mid-April. I've got that show on my radar, though, to review for the following Monday podcast because, it'll at least keep in line as an important part of the retro review series. I haven't checked to see if it's archived on Peacock yet, but I know it's on YouTube, so, either way, I have a way of watching it, but definitely stay posted for that because that could be a fun little third edition to the Monday podcast. Anyway, let's move on. World Class Championship Wrestling. This would be March 26th, 1983. Big theme for the night centered around the main event with the Texas Tornado tag match between the Von Erichs and the Freebirds. Which, if you know your World Class history, that was pretty much how you could sum up a lot of these shows in 1983. Some combination, some form of pinning up the Von Erichs and the Freebirds in matches, whether they're singles or tags. And, of course, last week they kind of took a break from that monotonous formula to try something different with the David Von Erich, Jimmy Garvin title match. And that was good. Especially when David mentioned in the opening monologue with Bill Mercer that he wants the fans to send in their letters to get World Class to sanction the rematch between the two. It at least keeps David preoccupied with another talent in the interim. Aside from that, though, David let us know early on that he's going to be ringside for the main event because... actually, David pretty much spilled the beans ahead of time and let everyone know, yeah, there's probably going to be a run-in at the end, so don't be surprised if the match has a DQ or non-finish. Wasn't lying about that. Our opening match for the show is Jose Lothario versus Jim Garvin. Yes, not Jimmy Garvin, but Jim Garvin. Got to give the new Texas heavyweight champion some formality. Although I don't believe this match was for the belt. I'll definitely say this, and no, I don't mean for this to sound derogatory in any way, but Sunshine was much more of a looker than Precious was. Kind of wish Sunshine would have stuck around the business longer. Of course, I don't need to spend another hour putting over how damn great Jimmy Garvin was. This is a showcase piece for the new champion, and Garvin didn't stray away from being awesome here. There's a great heat spot in this match where Lothario is trying to milk an early comeback on Garvin, so in order to cut him off, Garvin proceeds to back into the corner. He turns away from Lothario to cover up the back of his head and neck, and he begs for the ref to hold him back. I also enjoyed the part where Lothario caught Garvin with a knee drop, and as Garvin rolls to the outside selling the knee, his first words to Sunshine are, "How's my hair?" And as Bill Mercer commented on it, talk about priorities. What a fucking heel. And there were plenty of great spots in this match too. One of which you really don't think about how great it used to be, especially in the modern era where everyone just does bullshit and nothing makes sense. A referee distraction so the heel can pull the babyface down to the mat by his hair to put him in a chin lock. Think about how simple that is, but God, did it get a great reaction from the crowd. In fact, I just talked about this in the Dynamite review in that Punk-Dax match. Dax pretty much did the same thing to Punk. Punk had him in that Anaconda Vice, and Dax grabbed him by the hair to break the hold. Great heat spot. I wish more guys would do stuff like that. And man, what a classic heel finish. Garvin trying to grab a hold of Jose's ankles. Jose manages to wiggle free and flip Garvin over a couple times. Garvin manages to sucker Jose into the ropes so that when Jose tries to flip him over one more time, Garvin has the chance to grab the second rope, hold him down while the ref's counting Jose's shoulders. 1, 2, 3. There was a cool little post-match afterbirth with Jose and Garvin getting into it briefly, but Sunshine kind of intervened and forced Jose back while the heels turned tail and bailed out. I mean, I don't know how many new ways I can come up with saying it, but professional wrestling really used to be that simple back in the day. The amount of forethought that goes into something like this, I can't imagine it took more than 5 minutes. It's far and away better to all the contrived, overly plotted out garbage you see today. God, I wish things would just go back to being basic and easy to digest. We followed that with what we were told from Mercer was a conference meeting at Skandar Akbar's office to discuss OPEC. And if you think I'm joking about that, I'm not. Akbar shows us an updated newspaper that oil in the United States had dropped to $29 a barrel. And of course, this was in 1983 when the country wasn't in complete and utter chaos. And the United States was actually being run by a competent administration that ensured eliminating price control on oil to actually decrease the price of oil and raise production in the process. Nowadays, we're looking at something like what? I think we're up to $100-some a barrel for oil. Of course, that's what you get with Biden's garbage administration when they're anti-fracking. Instead of being the number one exporter of oil and using our natural resources through fracking, now we're importing all of our crude oil from overseas in places like Saudi Arabia and fucking Iran because we're in bed with them. All to try and appease the greeny weenies and their mission to force green energy propaganda down people's fucking throats. We wonder why gas prices are at record highs. Now, I live in PA where it's basically hovering around $4.29 right now. I can't even imagine what the poor saps in places like California are dealing with right now. Paying like $7 a gallon for a regular gasoline at the pump. Remember when y'all thought Trump was crazy? When he said before the 2020 election that if Biden got elected, we'd have gas prices that are soaring up to about $7 or $8 a gallon? Remember y'all thought he was a loon? Well, who's the loon now? Anyway, I have no idea how all this deals with Devastation Incorporated and or professional wrestling, but it was nice to go back in time and look at a time when the world wasn't in complete and utter shit. Makes you long for the past. King Kong Bundy and Toriatsu had what I think I would call a best case scenario match, meaning that at worst, it was boring, but it was not as horrible as I thought it would be when they announced it last week. They totally fucked up the finish, but in addition to knowing that Toriatsu has 2 left feet and couldn't wrestle his way out of a paper bag, we also know now that he has 0 athletic skill when it comes to catching objects. Literally, all he had to do was snag the kendo stick from Arman Hussein when he tossed it up from the ground. And, of course, Yatsu dropped it. So Hussein had to throw it back in, and all it did was make Bundy look even more stupid for not being able to block the shot. And all this was basically done to set up a kendo stick match next week between the Great Kabuki and Toriatsu, which I'm dying to see how they pull that off. We'll see if Yatsu has any skill when it comes to believably whacking dudes with objects. I predict not very. Somewhere in here we got a replay of the Kamala video pre-tape that I raved about a couple weeks ago. And it was equally as great watching it again. And still very bizarre actually seeing the visual of Kamala's actual face with less makeup than what we were accustomed to seeing from him in Mid-South or WWF. And the main event match was Kevin and Kerry Von Erich versus Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy with tornado rules, essentially. And again, man, I've noted it before, I'll say it again. The people are totally into this feud. No matter how many times they book some combination of these Von Erichs Freebirds matches on television every week, people go nuts for it every time. I don't know how long it takes throughout the year for people to grow bored of it, but by this period in late March going into early April, it's still one of the hottest angles and stories in wrestling by this point in 83. As far as action goes, it was a fun little messy brawl, but you can't really call it much more than that. For the most part, all four guys were in there at the same time doing stuff. And it was weird because there never seemed to be any real clear-cut advantage for either team at any point in the match. Like occasionally you get the brief period where the Von Erichs would get dumped outside the ring so the Freebirds could get a little bit of heat on the other one. But there was never like a real extended period where the faces were getting worked over. Like even when all four guys were in there at the same time, like you'd see Hayes working over one of the Von Erichs while the other Von Erich was working over Terry and vice versa. So again, a lot of it was just 50-50 back and forth between both teams, which kind of worked to give both teams an even playing field, but it also didn't make for a particularly interesting match either. And as David basically informed us at the beginning of the show, the finish saw Buddy Roberts try to get involved from the outside, so David just ran in for the blatant DQ, which they ended up just throwing the match out entirely and disqualifying both teams, I guess to make sure the people didn't leave pissed with the Freebirds being awarded the win. Generally, I've never been the biggest fan of the whole tornado lucha style roles matches when it comes to wrestling. It's a lot like why I never liked battle royals growing up. And even with the match only having four guys in it, it's just really hard to keep track of what's going on. Especially once they start cutting away from the wide shots so they could do some close-ups on specific guys. So, the finish was a dud, but the action was solid for the most part. And right before the end of the show, Bundy did a little hard sell for the kendo stick match between Kabuki and Yatsu next week, which I think was the only thing they really hyped up for that show. Overall, not a bad program. Jimmy Garvin's fucking awesome, and even though I'm already starting to get a little fatigued with the feud, I won't deny how electric that Von Erich Freebird program is. You think this went on for another year and a half, almost 2 full years? Good Lord, that's hard to imagine. The Devastation Incorporated stuff is still very bizarre to me. I think I talked about it last week. I'm still not particularly sure who the faces or the heels are in that program, unless it's strictly designed to be heel versus heel on purpose. And I still have no idea what that conference meeting session thing was supposed to accomplish, but it is what it is. Other than putting over a time in modern history when society was actually properly functioning. But that's a whole topical discussion for a different date, because we're about ready to wrap things up today. If y'all liked what you heard, make sure to tune in each Monday and Friday for new FSWR content. We'll be back this coming Monday for another podcast episode. And as always, please subscribe, leave a comment, and like the show to help me out in the algorithms here, especially on YouTube. Take care, all. Peace.